Recorded at the studios of Chicago Public Media, WBEZ, this is Stages to Success. The drive to excel is universal, as is the pride in a job well done. Whether you're staring down a decision maker for a multi-million-dollar contract, a television camera or microphone, a negotiating adversary, or an irate conductor, the pressure to perform can be exhilarating and exhausting. Join me and meet great storytellers from music and business. Our first guest is an icon in Chicago commercial real estate, Vern Schultz of Colliers International Group. Vern and I began our conversation as I remembered when I first heard about him about 12 years ago. When I came to Chicago from working a couple years in a development company in New York, I got paired in my new company with a veteran, Art. We both know Art. We got paired together on some sort of kind of strange projects because the partners knew that I had come from this little development company that we had our just stick in every little pot you could imagine.
In New York.
In upstate New York, right. And they said, for the projects we're working on, for the, some of the more typical large clients, but they're offbeat kind of sites, flex projects, strange industrial buildings, whatever, we'll pair you with Art because he's done everything. And we got into some discussions when Art would be just up against the wall and said, I have no idea what we're going to do in terms of this gluten-free bakery building. I have no idea. And what's going to comply for a gluten-free bakery building. And he goes, I know who we're going to call. We're going to call Vern Schultz. Wow. And that's when I started to hear your name. And I'd go into Art's office. And
when was that?
This would have been about 11 years ago, and 12 years ago. And I remember he just said, I'm just calling Vern. I'll put him on speaker. We'll sit and talk to you. And in his own Art way, we'd get talking. And it was your idea. You said, man, I've worked for Cook Foods on meat buildings, and they have the toughest compliances I can ever imagine. And if they can pass muster for meat, they should be good for you guys. And I took notes, and I thought, well, who is this guy? He's not asking to be part of the deal, that's for sure. But, who is this guy that's like the Great Wizard of Oz? And then we called you again on a laboratory project that was in Iowa, and it was super specialized. And I told Art that I was kind of stymied by it because we're trying to work on a sale-leaseback. And there were these rent rates for the university that were at 3 times X, really close by, and then there were lease rates really close to the facility that were X, 1/3 of the price. And he's scratching his head and he goes, I'm calling Vern. This must be this Vern Schultz guy again. And so we got you on there, and I started taking notes, Vern. You started talking about industrial revenue bonds and how they could, cause things to get tangled up. And you and Art were talking back and forth. And I'm just putting asterisks, and I'm talking and are just listening to you really smart guys talk. And it stuck with me, like, who is this source of information? And I think it was a couple visits later that I was in Art's office, and he said, you live right by McCook. You live in LaGrange. I said, yep. He goes, did you know the Vern has a street named after him over there? I said, oh, come on. And he goes, no, seriously, Vernon Court. You go right by it when you go out towards the 55. And I passed it. And I said, okay, I got to meet this guy. And sadly, you and I never worked together until we worked on that thing in the Illinois Medical District.
1340.
Yeah. But I just had you in the back of my mind, and I would certainly ask people about you, and that I've called you when I am just totally confused. I have a problem come up, and I think, oh, man.
And I would say you're a pleasure to work with. You're a good guy, and you're a pleasure to work with. Let me clear up a misconception. There is a street in McCook called Vernon Court or Vernon Avenue. Maybe it should be named after me. It really isn't.
It isn't.
I believe it's named after one of the mayors or fire chiefs of a different one they were putting the streets in.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, his first name was Vernon, but it's ironic because of I've had the good fortune of doing a lot of business in McCook,
Right.
and a lot of people, other brokers, will think the same thing as you, that it's named after me, and I'm correcting it for you, but I don't correct it for the other brokers.
Yeah, well, if they've ever listened to our podcast, they'll find out the truth. That's interesting because where the neighborhood where I grew up, my parents bought this palatial, beautiful place over the Mississippi River, and it was at the corner of Orchard Place and Hunter Lane. Nothing to do with our family.
Oh my God!
But of course,
Cool.
Everybody that pulled in
Yeah.
thought we had this really cool house and that the street had been named after us, and I didn't correct them either. So when you and I first kind of wound down the big thing we worked about 4 years ago, we went over to the Greek islands, and you told me about your dad in sales, and that's one of the questions I sent over. Can you give me the background of what he did in sales and maybe what his work ethic inspired in you? What did you see in your dad's work? Maybe you wanted to follow him, you wanted to work like him. Tell me about it.
Well, my dad was from a generation where it was not uncommon not to have finished high school, and I would say that the key to whatever successes he had in his business career really were he worked hard, and he put a lot of hours in and took care of his customers, which he was originally started in the milk business. He was the first guy to bring half-gallon bottles of milk into the Chicago market, and had problems with the unions and stuff like that. But at that time, there were milk stores. You didn't buy your milk at Mariano's or Jewel. You bought it at a dairy store. And
you didn't have a milkman delivering it to your door?
There were milkmen delivering it. Yeah, there were milkmen delivering it to the door. But my dad was picking it up across the line in Wisconsin and bringing it in during the night. He sold the milk business, and he went into the trucking business for a food company that's no longer around. It was National Tea, and it was the predecessor of kind of Dominic's. Dominic's came up. National Tea got bought by Loblaw out of Canada, and then Dominic's took over some of their stores when Loblaw couldn't make it. We were hauling trailers for National Tea, and then when Loblaw came in, they decided that they weren't going to do third-party business. They have third-party logistics guys. They were going to do it themselves. And my dad was looking for something to do, and he came home one day and he said, I found a business. I bought this engineering supply company, and we started out with a very small group of clients who were pretty much blueprint shops. Some of the classic Mossner and Cushing and Acme copy, the old classic copy shops when people had prints on blueprint paper, and we manufactured the blueprint paper and sold engineering drafting tables and copy machines. We then expanded the business to a dealer network from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to Omaha, Nebraska, and from Dallas to Minneapolis, and had a fairly successful company. But one day I was doing a business trip where I would periodically, about every 6 weeks, I would go out and call on some of our major clients, and one of our big clients was John Deere. And I called my dad on Friday. I was in Moline in the middle of the afternoon. I called my dad and I said, Dad, stay in the office. I got to talk to you. And so I drove up from Moline and I sat down and I said, our business is over. I said, I've had the good fortune to be following the Xerox engineering sales. This was a whole new project that Xerox was doing. And they went from the little tabletop kind of machines that would copy 8.5 by 11, 8.5 by 14. And they had a machine at the time was called an 1860, and it could copy up to 30 by 42. And I said, the minute they can get that anywhere close to the price of our product, we're out of business, because our product took chemicals to develop it, or ammonia. Or it was a very cumbersome product and had a limited shelf life, where Xerox was forever. So a couple of years after that, we had an opportunity to sell our business to a company we were doing some custom work for. And after a few months, I realized that they weren't going to make it. And I started looking for something else, which is how I ended up in the real estate business. And what I learned from my dad during this transition was that if you work hard and treat people fair, you'll come out, it'll be fine.
So was he actually negotiating with these farmers when he was buying milk? Was he a broker of milk, basically?
No, he was buying it from, well, in a sense, he was a broker of milk, but he was buying the bottled product from I would call it a Dean's. They were filling the bottles somewhere just outside of Kenosha, somewhere like that. Then he would take a truck or trucks, and they would load them up, and then they'd come to Chicago and distribute it to the dairy stores.
And you said that after the national tea thing, he wanted to find something, and you said that he bought this engineering supply company.
It was a cooperative blueprint paper manufacturing plant. It was at 9 West Illinois. It was on 3 floors in a basement. And he went in, and he actually answered an ad in Businesses for Sale in the Chicago Tribune.
Okay.
And he went and he saw it, and he came home, and I said, well, why are you buying that? And he said, well, every place I went that they showed me their customers, he said, it wasn't too long after the people were looking at it, he said they'd tear it up and throw it away. So he said, I just figured they'd keep going. Well, what had happened to us was as we couldn't make a living with just the co-op partners who were buying the stuff in Chicago.
Yeah.
So we had to expand the business. And once we expanded the business, that meant that we had to obviously increase our production of the product. And to try and do that on a 3-story and basement thing at 9 West Illinois, where we couldn't get a semi-trailer in, so we would unload the semis in a vacant lot that was over there somewhere and put it on a straight truck. And that's what I did every Saturday. Put it on a straight truck, drive the straight truck up the alley, back the straight truck into the dock, unload these 500-pound rolls of paper, and we would have a Otis elevator guy all day on Saturday, because we couldn't have the elevator be down, or if it went down, we had to have somebody right there to fix it, because we had to get the product up and be ready to go into business on Monday morning.
How did he finance the purchase of this company?
If I remember right, we got a bank loan, I think, for we had sold the trucking business, so we were sitting on some cash.
Yep.
And I think we took a portion of that cash and got a bank loan for the difference.
And you say first of all, what's your father? What was his name?
Vernon.
He's Vernon, so
Yeah.
you're junior.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
He was Vernon Walter. I'm Vernon Frederick.
Okay.
And when we lived in Lincolnwood, there was another guy in Lincolnwood whose first name was Vernon, and all 3 of us used the same internist. So
I'll be darned.
So he used to say it's the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost.
And you had, how old were you when you were working with your dad at this company, when you're driving trucks?
College.
College age.
Yeah, I was probably, I went to Lake Forest. So I was either a senior at Notre Dame High School or I was in college.
Oh, I taught at Notre Dame High School in the 80s.
Did you really?
Yeah. I taught clarinet at Notre Dame High School for their band director. And you've already mentioned some names like Mr. Conweiler, Beitler, Miglin. I mean, these are giant
Legends
names in the
Legends.
Chicago real estate industry.
Yeah, legends. Yeah.
And then you moved over to Grubb and Ellis.
No, actually, I was at Bennett and Conweiler for about 3 years, and there was a group of us who, the typical employee-employer kind of relationship. We felt that we were smarter and better and
Yeah.
all the rest. So there were about 12 of us who were planning to leave and en masse and start a new company. Mm-hmm. And we spent so much time trying to figure out a name, and we finally decided on the name that we would choose, that we would open up our new offices. And we'd found offices, I can't remember where. We hadn't signed a lease, but we had found offices. And we were the name of our company was going to be LaSalle Partners.
Oh, my goodness.
And there may still be, but there used to be a magazine, a trade paper called Realty and Building, and it came out every Saturday. And we would get down to B&K. There was a group of us on Saturday mornings, and we'd open it up because on Monday, the partners would be asking us, "Hey, I saw Ryerson Steel did a deal with, ABC Company and Nicholson Porter, let's just say, and I thought you guys were. Why didn't we see that deal?" So
Right.
So what you'd try and do is get in there and read all those deals, so you'd have a story as to why why you didn't do it. And on the front page was the headline of Realty and Building is, and I want to say it was IDI, maybe something like that, changes its name. Some company changes its name to LaSalle Partners.
Oh, my goodness.
So it was like, oh my God, it's our name, and so we started to unravel. And one of my dearest friends, Lou Savage, he said, "Look, I'm committed to leaving. I'm going," and he went to a very boutique-ish firm in Lincolnwood called Prudential Realty, and then shortly thereafter, because I had been starting to lay the groundwork to do my own business for the new company, and I said, I can't do this because I either have to be chasing this listings and business for Bennett and Conweiler, or I have to leave Bennett and Conweiler and go on my own. So then I left and went on my own, and then a couple months later, George Pappas joined me, and then some of the other guys stayed back. But it kind of unraveled. So then I started a company called Hartford Associates, and then after about 3 years, that was primarily a vehicle to do my own development and investment, and we had a couple of us, we had amassed like 1,800,000 square feet of commercial properties, industrial primarily, but some office and some retail. And but we were borrowing money at 3 over prime, and Carter was president, and prime went to 22, and these properties went poof. So what we had to do is we had to sell the good ones to pay off the debt on the bad ones. So my friend who was with me at Hartford Associates, which we changed to Hartford Realty Group as we got a little bit bigger, we were sitting in a bar on Dearborn, and I said, "You know what I think we have to do?" I said, "I think we have to get with a national company, because we have to be able to access these big corporations, because money was 25% at 3 over prime." I said, "We've got to get companies that can self-fund to buy and self-fund, can sell and don't have to worry about paying off bank loans." So we started to think about who we could team up with, and we got a call from, we called George Sabula, because we knew that he had been talking to Cushman and Wakefield. And George said, "Boy, you guys would be perfect. they want me to come in and run the downtown office and open up a suburban industrial office. And he said, I'm happy at Darwin. He said, I've got this great general warehousing business. And he said, but I'm going to tell Cushman, you guys are the guys they should talk to. We went to New York. We went to New York, met with the guys at Cushman, and they hired us, and then we went to work. And my friend Tim, who lived downtown on Astor, he took over running the downtown office and the office tenant rep side, and I went to Bensonville and opened up started the industrial and the suburban office leasing component.
There's something intoxicating, I think, about that idea that you're the developer, you're in control of the assets, it's your dream, it's your vision, and I can see why it draws people that they'll be the next superstar developer of projects. But where is sort of the basic difference for you? I mean, you're a mega producer as a broker. And you've been on both sides of the fence.
Well, I guess if I could do it, and if I had my timing, again, I'm coming back to timing. If my timing was right, but it was wrong. And then when I got back and started doing it again was the '85 Tax Act, and we had structured a bunch of deals to be tax deals. And then the Tax Act came through, and they changed that. So all the people that we had who were going to invest in it, they all disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
And the way a tax deal worked is you had to leverage it up like crazy. So now I'm stuck with, as a general partner and another couple of guys, we're stuck with these properties that are upside down in terms of the amount of debt that we have. So we lost it. If I had the money to do it, being a developer, there's a tremendous sense of pride
Mm-hmm.
in going by and seeing a building that you've taken from the ground and built and
Sure.
tenanted, and so. But what the problem that I had was, you as a broker, you're spending time being a developer, so you're not doing your brokerage business.
Mm-hmm.
And then when there's a problem in the development, you should be doing something in the brokerage deal, or you have a problem in the brokerage deal and there's a crisis in the development, and you're always betwixt and between.
Welcome to Stages to Success, highlighting individuals who have helped shape our industry in the Chicago area. My name is Chris Schramko, president of the Northern Illinois Commercial Association of Realtors. On behalf of our association, we are proud to sponsor this podcast series. NICAR provides valuable tools, resources, education, and networking to commercial real estate practitioners throughout the state of Illinois. To learn more about NICAR and the many benefits we offer our members, please visit our website, nicar.com. Thank you.
We're listening to an interview with Vern Schultz of Colliers International Group in Chicago. I see one company in your resume, Baird & Warner, that I only think of in the residential real estate world.
Yeah.
What was that history while you were there that they were obviously doing commercial real estate?
I had been 3 years at Cushman & Wakefield, and I decided that I had opened up that office, as I said, in Bensonville, and I really didn't want to be what they referred to as a player coach, because it was taking so much of my time to be the man, build up, interview, hire people, train people. It was taking so much of my time that I was unable to do my brokerage end. So what I was doing was bringing people in on deals that I didn't need. I could have done by myself, but for the fact that I had to do reporting as being the manager of the suburban office. And this was at a time when we didn't have CoStar and all of these other databases, where if you want to know what the vacancy is, today you press a button and your computer spits out. Then we were keeping track of stuff on 8.5 by 11 sheets.
Yep.
And we were taking the ads out of newspapers and the flyers that came through, and we were checking to see if we had that in our listings. And then to total that and go to a meeting for Cushman, I'd be a week and a half. They want to know what's the total number of properties in Chicago, how many are are vacant, how many does our competitor have, how many are by owner. And so I'd be, buried in that and not doing brokerage. And I sat down one time and I figured out how much of the various deals I had given to other brokers, and they did a fine job but I didn't need them to do it if I wasn't doing this other stuff. And I realized that I think my bonus that year for managing the office was $10,000 or $15,000. Now I got some perks and some expenses and stuff like that, but the actual cash. And if I remember right, I calculated that I gave up like $150,000 in commissions. And I remember I was sitting in my kitchen. I said to my wife, I said, "I'm going back to brokerage."
That's pretty easy math. Yeah.
So I was then going to go into Cushman's downtown office and be a downtown office broker. And out of the blue, I get a call from a headhunter, and he just keeps on me and keeps on me and keeps on me. And I said, "I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I don't want to manage anymore. There's got to be a number that you would do it." And so I said, "Well, okay." And I don't remember now, but at the time I threw out a number that I thought, you know what, I'm going to give him this number and that'll get rid of him. And he called me back. He said, and I didn't know who it was. He did not disclose who it was. He said, "Could you meet Mr. Baird of Baird and Warner at his home?" And I said, "Well, yeah, sure." So, and John Baird is one of the nicest people I've ever had the pleasure of knowing and working for. And he said, "I'd really like to build up our commercial department." So I went there, left Cushman, and I know Mitch Greenberg, who was a young office broker. I know he came with me, and he may have been the only one. And then from that, we built it up into, ultimately, at one time we were a sizable competitor in the market.
I never knew.
Yeah. And then Baird and Warner underwent some changes, and they decided that the best way to keep the banks happy was to change their focus back to residential, and so I left, and they probably closed the formal big commercial brokerage department like 2 years after I left. There was a transition period there, and then I took about 10 of the brokers who worked for me at Baird, and we went to Grubb and Ellis, and we.
They're interesting because when I came to Chicago in 2005, Grubb and Ellis was such a huge player, such a big shop, and then then they got involved with, I think it was triple net investments and purchasing buildings and combined.
Well, that was Hal Ellis. Yeah, Hal Ellis was doing that. But when we came over, the Chicago office, the Rosemont office, which is where we went in, was never really on the radar screen of the top producing offices. And we came over and brought a ton of business with us and some good brokers. What kind of happened was the company, it was private and went public, went private and went public again, and when they were public, then they had the quarterly earnings calls, and they always had to have a story to tell Wall Street. And so this one particular time, the news story was going to be corporate services. And they said, we're going to do corporate services, we're going to have these national accounts, and we're going to get this recurring revenue like CB and like JLL. And we couldn't do that because there's only room for CB and JLL. Cushman can do a little bit, and Colliers does a little bit, but at the level that Grubb wanted to be at that time, it couldn't be done. So what would happen is any deal that they could find to figure out how to put the corporate services guys in your deal, they did because they had to show Wall Street that this corporate servicing was working. So there was a particular deal in which they inserted corporate services, and I said, this isn't going to work. Coincidentally, at the time I had been pursued by Binswanger, and so I thought, well, all right, I'll go to New York, I'll go to Philadelphia and talk to him, and it ended up it wasn't, didn't match my expectations of what I thought they were talking about. So I came back, and I happened to be at an event, and one of the guys who was working for Bennett and Conway at the time, he said, how's it going? I said, well, everything's fine. I said, but geez, I just wasted a whole day in Philadelphia talking to Frank Binswanger and his team, and at the end of the day, it was totally different than what they thought I was looking for and what I knew I needed. It didn't match up. So he said, "Oh, so you're thinking of leaving?" I said, "Nah, not that. I'm not." I said, "This just happened to." He said, "Well, you got to talk to David Conweiler." I said, "Well,
I've been there, done that kind of thing, right?
I said, I don't know." I get in my car from this event, and I'm driving home, and David Conweiler says, "Vern, can we have breakfast tomorrow?"
Yeah.
And I don't know if we had breakfast the next day, but we did, and then I brought from Grubb. I brought four guys. I think there were 5 of us came over from Grubb, and it was a successful transition. And I've been at B&K since then.
Right, and
which is now Colliers.
Yeah, and when did they become a Colliers affiliated shop?
I've been there now the second time, about 15, 17 years maybe. They were actually Colliers when I came back.
Okay.
But it was Colliers, Bennett and Conweiler.
Yeah.
And then in the last couple of years, they've made everybody become Colliers.
And back to the Grubb and Ellis thing, they're part of what now is the Newmark Knight Frank.
Yeah, right.
And the trade name is gone forever, it sounds like, of Grubb and Ellis. Any of the big hitters from the old days still part of the operation that you know of?
Well, not in the Chicago office. Nationally, it could be. I don't know. Then when Newmark came in, they had a pretty tough employment contract, and most of the bigger guys from Grubb wouldn't sign that, and so they all went off to various and sundry places.
Right. I want to come back to McCook because having a home near there, we've lived in LaGrange or countryside so close by. I distinctly remember those huge Reynolds facilities just sitting there like the Death Star, just vacant.
Well, the first phase of McCook was actually the General Motors electromotive plant.
Okay.
It was the General Motors electromotive manufacturing plant because the engineering offices are still there.
Yeah, on 55th.
So I'm trying to think of who the manager was. I think the manager was of Grubb was Tony Lydon. And he called me in his office one day. He said, "Vern, would you do a favor for me?" And I said, "Well, if I can, I will." So he said, "Well, I asked a couple of guys in our office if they would put together a presentation for General Motors to pitch this plant in McCook, and they really didn't want to do it. They said the rumor in the industry is that it's going to Cushman, and there's a lot of work and a waste of time." So he said, "But we really have to at least make a presentation. We can't not make a presentation to General Motors." So I said, "Okay, I'll do it." And so I put a team together, Walter Murphy, Tom Condon, and myself, and I brought a vendor in, Dean Whitaker, who I've used for a long time on special projects to help me identify potential tenants or buyers of different than just a 30-foot clear warehouse in Elk Grove Village or Bolingbrook, the more challenging things. And so we went to New York. We went to Detroit, and made the presentation, and Bruce, I can't think of his last name, but he was the guy assigned to hire the brokerage firm. He said, you've given me a real problem. And I said, how's that? He said, well, I already told my boss we were hiring Cushman & Wakefield. And he said, your strategy and analysis is so much different, so much better. We really have to hire you guys.
Mm-hmm.
He says, I got to go in and unravel that. And he said, but I'm going to hire you guys. And so fortunately he did. And we started the marketing. And on a particular, I think it was a Thursday afternoon, at Grubb's office, I had Bruce Szymanski. Bruce Szymanski was the GM guy. I had him in. I had Mike Mullen and Bobby Stovall, who were the primary guys behind Centerpoint, and we had a meeting. And Bobby, in his Mississippi drawl, said, all right, so how much is it going to take to buy this? And Bruce said, this is going to be our bottom number. He stood up and he said, okay. And he looked at Mike. He says, wrap the deal up. We'll give him his price. I have to go fishing, because he was a big fisherman. He had a home in.
So you turned it that quickly to Centerpoint Properties.
Yeah.
That's astounding.
Yeah, it was very, very, very short term. Now, Centerpoint owned it, and we really struggled with this 1,700,000 square foot uninsulated metal panel building. We had architects, we had plans, we had contracts, we had everything. And I remember one day walking into, we would have these meetings in this office in this big warehouse, big manufacturing that had been shut down. And the worst call you could get is somebody saying, I want to see the facility, because to walk that thing was hour and a half.
Sure.
And then you knew that after they left, they were dumb. They were awestruck. They didn't. We don't know what to do with this.
Right.
And so I came into the meeting and I said to everybody, I said, I have the answer. And I don't want to say that I came up with this just genius by myself. But I said, I have the answer. And I think it was Mike. It was either Mike Mullen or it was one of the architects. What's the answer? I said, tear that down and let's build brand new building. This is a bulletproof location. We're going to make a hodgepodge of some building that's going to have 200, 300,000 feet that we're never going to lease, because it's going to be an odd. And when you get done, Wall Street's never going to buy it from you, because they won't understand it. So we went on, and there was 160 acres. We sold 60 acres to Henry Crown Material Service for a quarry, and we took the balance of 100 acres, and we built the first building on 47th Street. It's a multi-tenant building of about 150,000 square feet, and I'm working on a deal there now, and I drive by it all the time. And one of the first tenant was it's Cardinal Electric, I think, or something like that. Mm-hmm. They're still there.
Yeah.
So they've been there forever. So we sold out that park, and then towards the end of us selling out that park, the guys who bought Reynolds Metals, that went under. Mm-hmm. And I think it was J.P. Morgan had the note, and they foreclosed. And long story short, they hired me, Bennett and Conweiler to sell it, and we put together a package. And at the end of the day, Centerpoint was successful in buying that, and that was 240 acres, I think. That's all been sold and built. And then I had the good fortune of getting hired a couple of years ago by ExxonMobil to get rid of about 45 or 50 acres that they had a manufacturing plant there. And I sold that to Bridge Development, and they built a 300,000 square foot building. Was the first building while we were under contract and in due diligence, because there were some very challenging environmental issues on the Axo site. That while we were getting that all resolved, we found Freeman Decorating, and so it ended up being a build-to-suit. And then on the remaining parcel, we built like a 250,000 square foot multi-tenant building that we filled up. But I had heard, I've never seen numbers, but I heard that today the number of people employed today exceeds the number of people that were employed at Reynolds and that electromotive plant. And I guarantee you the real estate taxes that are being paid today on all those new properties are far greater than that, and the asset value would be off the charts in comparison.
And if you live down in under the 294 overpass in the little village of McCook, you don't pay real estate tax on your home. Yeah, so it's big benefit to them, except for the overpass.
Right.
Well, I remember coming from New York and to Chicago, and a young man that I was teaching clarinet lessons to stayed with me after I'd made the transition into business, and his father was a top regional salesperson in the East for Kronos Foods.
Oh, my
which
God.
got me the interview for that project that you won.
Yes.
And he called me back. He said that we gave this business to Vern Schultz, and the partners I worked for said, "Well, lost to a worthy competitor." Then.
And I lose some, and I say, hey, you hired a good guy, and I'm sure it'll work out.
Yeah.
And, wish we'd have gotten it, but Pat's since passed away.
Oh, he has.
He became a very close, dear friend, well beyond the business. Yeah.
And does one stick out? Does one win stick out? Maybe it's that GM story you told.
The GM story is probably. I would say the GM story and the Axo Nobel, because. The GM story, because it was 11th hour, came in, was, put Walter and Tom and I put lots of hours in, and so did Dean Whitaker. And to have won that was a real coup. The Axo Nobel was particularly pleasing because I'm not so sure that I was invited in as like the heir apparent in McCook. I think I was being given a courtesy interview, and I gave them some numbers for the sale of the land, and I gave them, through my close personal friend from Environmental Group, I gave them a strategy as to how to resolve the environmental stuff, and they bought it. And at the end of the day, we virtually hit the numbers right on. And Dennis DeCamp, who was then the real estate guy at Axo, he's retired now. He and I are still friends, play golf, in the summertime, and so that was particularly satisfying to be that bullish about the value and be able to produce it.
Yeah, and you feel like you really served their long-term vision and their needs. Yeah. I agree. Right. That's the greatest the greatest perk from the business is feeling like you solved a big problem.
Yeah, and the relationships that I've had the good fortune to make mean a lot to me. Particularly the clients, and being able to do deals time and again. There's a company called Collections, Etc., which I started out with them when they were in 10,000 square feet in Lincolnwood, and then they expanded and they needed some more space, and I was able to lease half the building next door, so now they had 15,000 feet, and then I sold them a building in Des Plaines, and then they were in 100,000 feet, and then I leased them some more. Then I leased them some more space, and then I put them in ultimately 450,000 feet of warehouse space in Melrose Park and 100,000 feet of office space in Elk Grove Village.
Oh my!
And that was when Paul Ahern was kind of the head of acquisitions for Centerpoint, and we made that deal. And I said, boy, Paul, I was actually in the office with the owner of collections and the CFO, and we were talking about a strategy of going back to counter on this lease, and we were involving Centerpoint in buying their existing building in Des Plaines because they didn't want to have to carry the building, and so I was making the argument to the collections guys as to why the value was X and they wanted Y, and Todd Lustbader, who was the owner of collections, his secretary comes in. She says, "Mr. Lustbader, Mr. Ahern is on the phone. He needs to talk to you." And he leaves. He comes back in and he says, "Well, I guess I should be the broker." And I said, "How's that?" He says, "They're going to give us the price we want." So the following day, I called Paul Ahern and I said, "Man, this is going to be tough. You gave him that price, and now we're going to have transaction costs on top. When I go to sell this for you, it's you've really raised the bar." I said, "I don't know how do you get to this?" And he said, "Vern, their occupancy changed our total occupancy in our portfolio by a couple of points." He said, I want to say the number was, we got 22 million shares out. Wall Street says their occupancy added $2 a share. He said, we made $44 million. He says, I don't care that I gave him an extra $500,000 for their building.
Wow. You live in rarefied air, Vern.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. And the Lustbader's collections has been a good long-term tenant.
Yeah.
A client.
Yeah, when you work with people over many stages, that I always consider it a real compliment when you get that call the second and third time around.
Yeah, that's
then you've done some good work.
Right.
You've been at this. You said during the Carter presidency. Did you start in 74, 75 before he became president?
I think I started probably in 73, maybe.
73.
74. I know. I think it was my second year. At Bennett and Conweiler when I won the Chicago Real Estate Board sales. At that time, it was salesman of the year.
Right.
And then it became salesperson.
Right.
Salesman of the year, and that was, you won that award. Some of it was no different than today, a popularity contest. There was some, but you had to. It was to qualify to have you be nominated. It was a combination of the number of deals you did and the dollar volume, so that because they didn't want it skewed by one guy would go and do a $10 million office deal, and he only did one deal, and they didn't want it by some guy who did 400,000 square foot office flex deals and made $200. So that was a particular year that I did literally closed 125 deals.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, I closed the deal on Christmas Eve, and I closed the deal on New Year's Eve, so it was a total of 125 deals.
That's just
it seems
staggering.
Like when I met, it does seem staggering, but when you're in it and you're doing it, it's you're now. When I think back, that was not a time where we had cell phones, and I mean, I did have a mobile phone, but we didn't have the internet, and we didn't have texting, and so if I called on somebody and he said, "Yes, I like that idea. Let's make an offer." What I'd have to do is I'd have to go back to my office, and then I would have my secretary type up an offer on a blank piece of paper. Then I would take it back to him, to the client, and he would put it in his Xerox copy machine, and he would copy it on his letterhead, and then he would say, then I would deliver it to the broker. Now that's
Oh yeah. It's seconds. It's second, but that document has a little more intrinsic value.
Right.
The way you did it.
It has a lot more intrinsic value because if you look at the majority of the documentations that go back and forth now between us as brokers, they'd never hold up in court.
No.
I mean, because it's me telling you that I'm representing so and so, and my guy's signature isn't on it anywhere, and
Yeah.
But that's the way the business has evolved.
So 44, 45 years you've been at it.
Maybe a little less than that, but yeah, close.
And you're married to the same lady over that whole period of time.
64, so it'll be 55 years.
That's the greatest congratulations of all.
Yeah, it's
in our culture, that is a great
in our culture
achievement.
and in our industry.
Vern, you are the best first guest for this podcast I could ever imagine. It's an honor. It's a pleasure. And thanks for coming into Chicago Public Radio.
It was nice. My wife said, so what are you doing again? I said, I'm actually doing something. And I said, I'm really doing it because John is just a really nice guy. I said, I don't know if I'd be doing this for everybody.
There you go. I'll take that. I hope you enjoyed today's interview with Vern Schultz of Colliers International Group in Chicago. Join us again for people and stories from the worlds of the symphony orchestra and commercial real estate for our next episode of Stages to Success. To Success. To Success. To Success.